I just remixed the song Crazy by Seal, which I'm a longtime fan. It's one of the songs that started my career and it started my interest in modern music, or restarted it. Um, and so I found a couple of funny things about it. Number one, the tempo is funny. So probably in the process of the mixdown, the tempo I think probably was altered because it's a weird tempo. It's something like 102.6 something. And I was able to get pretty close to it, close enough for me to do some stuff with it. But it still had a bit of a drift, so something else was going on there, and that could be a thing of like using tape or whatever. So that was one funny thing about it. Another funny thing about it is I found out it has cowbell in the drum, and what's funny about the cowbell is it has the same sort of tone as the synthesizer that's on top of the cowbell. And it's like a little groove shadow for the synthesizer, in addition to all the other stuff that's working in a sort of harmonic way with that sound. But it's very subtle because that sound is the star of that production. And the other funny thing that I found out about it is the bass is not acting like you think it would. And I used a source separator that got a really incredible, plucky version of the bass. I'm like, this is the actual bass. It was so good. And Trevor Horn was a bassist, I think, for Yes. And so nobody knows what's going on with bass like he does. And so what he was doing there is you have a switching that's happening with a percussive effect of the bass, which is cool about bass. Is that, can you imagine like a low end instrument and being able to make a plucky percussive sound? That's exactly what I love. That's what everybody loves. Is that low end bang? To get you going, to get the thump. So, anyways, so the bass doesn't actually follow the chord progression. Instead, it's doing this sort of back and forth between being a rhythmic bass and being a melodic bass, but mostly it's functioning as a rhythmic bass with a very specific sort of funky style pattern, but it's not like a traditional funky style pattern because of course it's a unique production. So, but I thought that was cool about the bass because I'm trying to like figure out like what should I do with my additional low end material. And what I ended up doing was I made them more like an X chord to where you can't discern clearly. And I tried to reduce the amount of interference with what's happening between the bass and the chords in terms of what I added. And so my X chord means it's going to be more of a effect-based chord than it is a discernible chord, basically is what I'm trying to say. So. But I just wanted to mention that about the bass. It's a very slick bass and it's a very repetitive bass, but there's a lot of very subtle differences as the sound progresses. So I think those are the main things that I noticed about that track. So, anyways, it's a really awesome track from the '90s, and I think of it as one of the greatest pieces of music that was ever produced. And I don't think that it was like a moment in time, and I don't think they'll ever be recaptured. So I just went into a sort of different direction. I said, how can I make a cool remix of Crazy? Everybody wants to do it. Everybody wants to do a remix. But how do you make it so that it transcends the idea of the remix? Well, that you put your signature idea of the X chord and the X riff, and you blend that instead. So it becomes more than the remix. It becomes a launching pad for, like a new kind of remixing capability, which is the X riff and the X chord. So, anyways, my piece came out okay, and I used the brilliant backings of these guys. I mean, if you look at the album that was released in the '90s, there's so many musicians on it, and so there's definitely like a musicality. Trevor Horn was known for sparing no expense, and I studied his productions, but mostly Seal, because that was like the peak for me. He did a lot of work, but really something magical happened there. There was not going to be any, give. It was going to be perfection. Now they teetered off in the, 2000s, and it went into a different direction, maybe more towards commercialism and less towards virtuoso and virtuosity and the premium excellence of production music. Because nowadays everybody's doing or trying to do similar things like that. So, anyways, I tried to make my remix of a fantastic track a sort of different take on how to remix a track, and instead of putting like a unique sound, put a next level concept to the rhythm. Because I was thinking for a long time, this has been on my mind for probably since I heard the song. I want to do like a version of this, and so when I first heard it, I also conceived of the idea of making a sound design based production where all the sounds were just sound design, and that includes the rhythm, and that includes all the backing so-called instruments that were going to be atonal. And this is something that's very easy to do with today's technology. So I didn't really ever get around to that specifically. I mean, I may eventually, but it definitely was like a thing where you had contagious intellectual download because you're hearing something fantastic, and so you want to achieve a level of greatness like that. You want to think new things like that. So that's how powerful that production was. Anyways, I'll leave it at that, and have a good day.